Good evening. Tonight, I am going to tell you the story of unrequited love. A love that a god felt for a female who did not wish to reciprocate it. But before we begin our story, let's settle down for a relaxing half hour. Take a few seconds to calm your breathing. Allow your body to sink deeply into your mattress. Now take a few deep breaths as you lie down, inhaling and exhaling, feeling your heart rate slow down, settling, while any thoughts of the day also subside. As you feel those thoughts slipping away, simply let them go. Just lay any burdens aside, any other anxieties that have been crowding your mind. And now, imagine that you are in ancient Greece, a land between the sky and sea, a land where stories hold the key to our past and also to our future. A place where there are hundreds of stories to hear and to tell. There, the sun shines high, the wind is cool, and many sailboats grace the waters as they journey around the islands, islets, coves, and bays. You too would surely like a trip to this historical land, and so you relax as you listen to this story. Are you ready now? Then let's begin. This story takes place a long time ago in ancient times, when humans and gods and goddesses, nymphs and magical creatures roamed our planet. This was when the light of the sun was known as the great god Apollo, and the glow of the moon washed over the earth every night by his counterpart, the goddess Serene. Apollo, the god of light, son of Zeus, had but one important duty: to drive a 4-horse chariot across the sky, to give light to all men, women, children, and living things. As he did so every day, Apollo would race his chariot from one end of the earth to the other, watching the world as it woke up beneath him every morning. Now, you must understand that Apollo was a god who held quite a lot of power. For with his light, the sunlight, he caused plants and trees to grow. He gave energy and power to every living thing. Without him, none could live as prosperously. And because he was the great god of the sun, he was loved by many maidens. Throughout his existence, Apollo fathered many children and took many lovers. Truth be told, the goddesses adored him, sought out a place in his realm, and wished to experience his love. The mortal women, too, often gazed up to the sky, admiring Apollo's warmth and strength. Apollo did not marry any women or goddess, but that is not to say he did not have lovers. He had dozens, in fact. But our story is about the first female whose beauty bewitched Apollo, before anyone else claimed his heart. She was also his most famous love. This female's name was Daphne, daughter of the river god Peneus. Daphne was a nymph, a beautiful, sprightly, and sensuous creature who lived among the sparkling ripples and waves of the water. Nymphs were not human, and not fully goddesses. Perhaps minor goddesses, you could say. And there were many of them who roamed the earth, wherever there was nature, trees, caves, beaches or meadows, you would find the nymphs gathering there. The nymphs were responsible for looking after the plants and animals of their realm. They protected the living things who grew freely, filling the earth with colour and vibrant energy. There were also many different types of nymphs. For example, the nymphs of the flowers, who lived between the blossom's petals. The nymphs of the breeze, who flew on the wisps of cooling winds that sailed around the earth, following their father, the wind god. There were nymphs of fountains, rivers and springs, those who chose water as their constant companion. They were also called Naiades, the nymphs of trees and forests, whom some called Dryades. From the tall pines to the great oaks, the forests hid many of the nymphs between their branches and leaves. Then, the nymphs of the sands, who made their home amongst rocky shores and shell-covered beaches. These graced the tides as the ocean rolled back and forth, back and forth. There were many other types of nymphs, too many to name them all now. What is important to remember is that they were lovely, graceful creatures, and their beauty was, in fact, what shaped the earth's beauty. Daphne was a naiad nymph, caretaker of the waters. Her ethereal beauty was a blend of the water's restlessness and calmness. As she moved along the river, she caused it to flow in many directions, giving life and grace, and reflecting the sun wherever that river journeyed. One day, as Apollo raised his chariot high in the sky, he noticed his own reflection in the river, and as he followed it, he also noticed the beautiful nymph who was responsible for keeping his water pure and flowing. Yes, there she was, her long hair dancing in the water, her naked limbs caressed by diamonds of light as they danced on its surface. The irresistible Daphne. Apollo had heard the other gods and creatures speak of Daphne and her beauty before, but this was the first time he saw her with his own eyes. He needed not even a full minute to decide that she was the most beautiful creature he had ever seen. He could hardly tear his eyes away from her, but duty called, and as the day wore on, he sped his chariot across the sky, from one end of the earth to the other, all the while thinking of this nymph he had seen, unable to get her out of his mind. When Apollo consulted his friends, they told him what he hadn't known before. Daphne was a peculiar creature, and he should be aware of this. She did not desire to marry any man or god. She was a nymph, committed to her work, to caring for the water. There was no human nor god alive who could distract her from her daily tasks. "Trust us, we've all tried before," they admonished Apollo. The truth was that Daphne admired Diana, the moon goddess. Diana was said to be pure and chaste, while serving the universe as was her duty. And Daphne wanted to be just like her. She did not want to marry anyone and become committed to anybody, be he a man or a god. Well, as you can imagine, Apollo did not think this to be much of a challenge. The next day, as his chariot passed over her river, Apollo called out to her. Daphne gazed up at the sun god. Showing off again, she said to herself. She continued swimming, continued ignoring him. And again, Apollo called out to the young nymph. "Daphne, don't you desire to ride with me in my chariot of fire?" he asked, but she paid no attention to him. Apollo tried to get Daphne to look at him day after day, but she could not be convinced. Finally, he decided to look for Eros, the god also known as Cupid. His arrows, when shot into the heart of any creature, would pierce them with love and desire. This was Eros' daily activity, and surely he could help Apollo out here, the sun god thought to himself. However, Apollo could not help but laugh when he found Eros and saw him playing with his bows and arrows as if they were great hunting weapons. Apollo felt proud of his own powers, which could not even stand comparison to Eros' single arrow trick. He swooped on over to the god of desire and gave a little laugh. "Why do you play with weapons of war? They are probably better off in the hands of someone who knows how to wield real weapons," taunted Apollo. "Hand them over, and maybe you should play with kindle flames instead." Eros was not amused. Apollo thought quite mightily of himself, and he was indeed powerful. But that was no reason to make fun of the other gods or their duties. "Strike everything else you want with your great arrows, Apollo," he called back, "and leave mine alone, lest they strike your heart." Apollo laughed, and was about to tell him that he did indeed need one or two of his arrows for Daphne's young heart. However, before the sun god could get any closer, here is what the god of desire, Eros, did. He carefully chose 2 arrows from his full quiver. One was a golden arrow. It was very sharp and gleamed in the light that shone down from Apollo's being. This one he held carefully, fitted on his bow, pulled back the string until it was tight enough, and then pointed it straight at Apollo's heart. Upon release, the arrow flew through the air and hit its target. The sun god was smitten as he looked down on Daphne. If it was love that filled his heart in days past, now it was the desire so strong that nothing else could compare. But Eros was not finished yet. He had planned a second arrow, a very, very blunt one, this time tipped with lead. This one he adjusted to shoot straight to the heart of Daphne. And those who knew Eros and his ways knew that the arrows tipped with lead would do the opposite of love. They would repel. Whoever was struck by these arrows would also be struck with hatred for the one who was in love with them. And they would also be immune to all the so-called weaknesses that being in love sometimes brings. Now, you must remember that when this story took place, Apollo was still a youth. He had never been in love before, and, as we all know, falling in love for the first time is an experience unlike any other. And now, Apollo's first love was consuming his heart and mind. The way the sea consumes the sand when the moon's tide carries the water back to the shore. All day long, as he drove his chariot, he could think of nothing else but the beautiful Daphne. His wheels were on fire, and so was his heart. When night came, and the western wind had cooled the chariot, he still could not put her out of his mind. Daphne was the theme of his dreams. She ruled his thoughts as if a nymph could ever overpower a god. never did fall in love with Apollo, for the arrow that pierced her heart was the one tipped with lead. Whenever he passed above her, she felt repulsed. She hated him. She despised him and wished he would disappear forever. Of course, she also knew that without the light of the sun, darkness might overwhelm the world. And so, if he must love her, then let him love her from a distance. She would not give in. Daphne was determined to stay as pure as the moon goddess Diana, whom she still adored. One day, Apollo could not stay away from the object of his love no longer. He followed Daphne as she flitted through the grass. It was a beautiful spring day. The flowers were blossoming around Daphne's feet. Little birds fluttered down to sit on her shoulders. As she walked, barefoot in the wet grass, Apollo thought to himself that it looked as if the grass beneath her feet shimmered in golden showers. The white-hot flames of his chariot shone down like a spotlight on her, and made the sparkles around her glow like an aura of beauty. He was mesmerized. Apollo came lower to touch her. He wanted to kiss her soft lips, feel her skin, caress her hair, and lie down with her in that golden grass. But before he could approach her, Daphne heard him moving and spun around. "Keep your distance, Apollo," she warned him. "Come now, Daphne," protested the sun god. "I am not your enemy, but your lover. I bow to you and you alone. I might conquer all others on earth, but you have conquered my heart, and I only wish to worship you, to kiss you." He moved forward to grasp her hair, but as Daphne heard these words, she began to run, and run, and run. The more afraid she grew, the faster she ran. She was spurred on by the fear in her heart, just as Apollo was spurred on by love as he started to chase her. She sped on, her heart racing, her hair blowing in the wind. He followed her close, his chariot gaining speed and wings on fire. Daphne could feel Apollo's heart close behind her. She picked up her feet and ran faster, faster, faster. But then, the nymph of the water realized that she could never, ever outrun the sun. She was nearly at the banks of the river, ruled by her father Peneus. She did not stop until her feet touched the water, and then she cried out, "Father, help me, save me from Apollo." She was calling out to the river god, her father, Peneus. In that fateful moment, Peneus heard her cry. He looked to see that his daughter was being overcome by a being more powerful than other gods. And if it was love that was spurring him on, well then, his power would be even more invincible. He knew what he had to do to save his daughter. No longer would she be the unbound, carefree nymph that she was before. No longer could she roam the forests, swim in the rivers, go wherever she pleased. He would change her into a different creature. But this way, she would not be overcome by Apollo. He would turn her into a laurel tree. It was a tough decision for any father to make, but Peneus knew that it would be for his daughter's own good. As Apollo came nearer, he reached out to grasp Daphne's arm, and with the other he clasped her waist to pull her towards him. Suddenly, the skin of her flesh started to dry up and grow darker, the color of bark. Apollo thought she had stopped and was about to turn to face him, when he saw from her long and nimble legs the roots of a tree grow outward and reach to the earth, digging themselves into the soil. He looked into Daphne's eyes and saw there was a look of both anxiety and relief, all at the same time. And as he gazed at her face, he saw it morphing beyond recognition. Her long, flowing blonde hair, those strands that he saw as jewels and had come to love, started to blow in the wind, reaching wildly up to the sky. He watched as her hair kept on blowing, kept on morphing, and took on the shape of leaves and branches. Apollo did not know what was happening to his beloved Daphne. A magical, mystical effect was taking place, but he did not know where it came from, or how. As he stood, looking at her now frozen, he thought he could hear her voice, even through her pursed and frozen lips. I could never love you, Apollo, not in the way that you love me. I am the child of the earth, and forever here, connected to the earth, I will now stay. Apollo cried out in fear at this voice. He took a step backwards and gazed in astonishment. For now, he saw that the young nymph had completely morphed. She was no longer a girl, but a tree. A laurel tree with deep green leaves, steady branches, and a trunk rooted firmly in the earth. He tried to touch her, but she did not feel as supple as before. Woody branches now stuck out, poking at his fingers. Even so, he moved forward to embrace her. Still he saw beauty in that earthen tree, those deep green leaves. He reached out to pluck a few of the leaves, a few of the branches, and shaped them into a crown he placed on his own head. Very well, Daphne. Since you cannot be my bride, at least you shall be my tree. You are my laurel one. I shall wear you always in my hair, and think of you all day long for every day to come. Daphne could hear Apollo as he spoke these words, but now a deep calm and peace had filled her heart. For her father had heard her cries, and had given her the chance to keep on living near the earth that she loved so much, and wait for no man, no mortal, and no god, no immortal, to ever touch her in a way she did not desire. In her mind, Daphne was free. She might be forever stuck to the soil. She might not have the freedom to move about as she once did. But this was the kind of freedom she knew how to treasure. This way, no other creature could ever own her. She could finally be like the moon, an object that all men admired, but no one had ever enslaved. She could finally live in the light of her heroine, Diana. Apollo was forced to go on with his day and his existence, and, oh yes, he did find other maidens to love, even other goddesses. Yet, he never forgot his first love, Daphne. From that day on, Apollo always wore the wreath of the laurel tree in his hair, and, on Mount Olympus, anyone who had completed a mission fit to be honored by the gods was given a laurel crown to grace their heads as well. It was considered a mark of beauty, a crown of glory, and, to this day, Men and women all over the world still speak of laurels won. It should also be said that from that day on, all other living creatures thought twice before they ever dared to mock the god of desire, Eros. For everyone learned from the mistake Apollo had made. In the land of ancient Greece, every 4 years, a laurel wreath was given to the winner of the Pythian Games, a competition held to honor the sun god, Apollo. Thank you for joining me for this story on Soothing Pod. I do hope that when you find your true love, it will be reciprocated to you in the way that you wish for. Good night, sweet dreams, and until next time.
Hello, and welcome to Soothing Pod Sleep Stories. My name is Arif, and tonight I will be your guide as we journey to lush, fog-shrouded mountains to relax and unwind with the Greek myth of star-crossed lovers, Echo and Narcissus. We will journey through forests of cedar and pine, hear tales of beauty near still, glassy pools, and experience a tale of love unlike any other. Before we begin, however, let us take a moment to relax and find comfort in the space that we are in, here and now. Close your eyes and allow your body to sink into the mattress beneath you. For a moment, I want you to try and imagine a floating orb made of a thick, cool mist. Imagine that orb bobbing through the air, slowly and gracefully, until it just barely brushes the crown of your head. Breathe in and out. In and out. As this orb slowly moves down your body, bringing a refreshing, cool chill with it everywhere that it travels. And as it travels, pay attention to how your muscles feel in each and every body part. As the orb of fog brushes down your arms, turn your attention to the muscles there. With that gentle touch of that orb, feel your hands, arms, shoulders, and wrists relax and unravel, sinking deeper into the mattress than you thought possible. Feel the mist travel to your chest and rest there for a brief moment, filling your lungs with fresh, cool air. As the comforting fog envelops you, let the tension of the day melt away into the room around you. Feel as the heaviness in your heart evaporates, becoming part of that orb of fog. Feel as your lungs open up more and more, allowing you to breathe soothing layer of snow-white fog, like a cool, serene sauna just for you. Now that we have taken the time to unwind and find comfort in the space that we are in, here and now, let us begin our story. The mountains deep within the countryside were said to be some of the most beautiful in all the land. They were peaceful mountains, miles and miles from the nearest town. You could not hear the laughter nor talk of men when you disappeared into its evergreen groves, sat by its still waters, or laid your weary head in its fields, flourishing with wildflowers. It was a place to escape, a place of respite where nothing in the outside world mattered, a place where no one would find you if you simply wanted to go somewhere and be without bringing the expectations of others along for the journey with you. And because these mountains were such a serene place, untouched by the struggles of men, it was a place where those who possessed magic long traveled to. And perhaps one of its most frequent visitors was none other than Zeus himself. As often as he could, he would travel down to the mountains, escaping his obligations as a god and as a husband. He would join the wood nymphs, who always welcomed him with jovial smiles and gifts of gratitude. They would embrace the god the moment he set foot on the mountain, and would introduce him to the peaceful, joyful life that they all lived. They would bring him to the flower-filled meadows, where they would lie in the tall, silky grass, breathing in the sweet aroma of the flowers and reading long, flowing poetry to one another. They would watch as the petals drifted by on the nectar-tinged breeze, dancing as if nature was putting on a show just for the nymphs and Zeus. They would take him to the waterfalls that dotted the high, lush cliff sides in the region. There, they would embrace Zeus as the cold mountain water ran over them, its gossamer filling the surrounding air, giving a home to rainbows that would often shimmer and appear before their very eyes. They would sing songs there, giggling and laughing throughout the whole day. Sometimes they would play games in the forest, zipping and frolicking through the thick leaves with smiles on their faces, trying to hide from one another. But truly, there was only one person jealous goddess, and soon she caught wind of Zeus's escapades down in the mesmerizing mountains. She began to travel down to the mountains whenever her husband could not be found back home. And when she did, the nymphs knew they had to do something to protect themselves and avoid being caught. Hera was not known for being particularly understanding, nor was she forgiving of those who spent time with her husband. It was a young nymph named Echo who was tasked with protecting the other nymphs from Hera's wrath. Anytime Hera traveled down to the mountains, Echo would step in her path with a smile on her face. Echo was perhaps the most charming out of all the mountain nymphs. She was a woman of absolute beauty and grace, but it was her personality that drew everyone to her. She had a way with words, the ability to draw people in and make them feel special about themselves, a way to invite them to experience life with her in an entirely special way. And so, people loved Echo, and for quite some time, Hera was no different. Every time Echo stepped in her path, Hera was enthralled with her. Echo would chat for hours about everything and nothing. Her melodic voice soothing Hera, and her charming stories causing her to laugh, cry, and be truly vulnerable. And Echo genuinely enjoyed her time talking with Hera. Though it began as a ruse, she came to look forward to the goddess's visits down to the mountains. But soon, Hera caught on to Echo's task at hand. When they rounded a corner into a vibrant glade one fine day, Hera caught sight of the nymphs running away, trying to escape being seen with her husband, who was lying in the cool grass with a smile on his face. Hera was devastated, not only by her husband's betrayal, but by what she perceived as Echo's betrayal. She turned to Echo with anger and bitterness and power spiraling in her beautiful green eyes. She raised her hands over the nymph and, with magically charged words, she told Echo, "Your tongue has made a fool of me. Henceforth, your words will be more brief. You will always have the last word, but never the first." With that, Hera disappeared, taking her husband with her. Echo felt something shift inside her chest, like a piece snapping out of place and forever getting lost. "Are you all right, Echo?" one of the gentle wood nymphs asked, finally summoning up the courage to emerge from the woods. Echo responded. She blinked in surprise, placing a soft finger to her chest, wondering how words she hadn't intended to say had sprung from her lips. "Echo, what is the matter?" another wood nymph asked. She laid a hand on Echo's cheek, looking into her eyes with sincerity and concern. "The matter," Echo replied. The wood nymphs all came around her, wanting to aid their friend. It was then that they realized what HRS curse had meant. Echo would never be able to say anything except for the final words that came from another's lips. There was a period of mourning then. The other wood nymphs longed for Echo's tales and stories. They missed her beautiful singing and the charming way she spoke of the beautiful world around them. On occasion, the nymphs would gather by the very waterfalls that they had once bathed with Zeus, and there they would sing softly and slowly, taking it word by word, so that Echo could sing along with them. They would do this for hours, simply to have the opportunity to hear her beautiful voice echo off the canyon walls and dance between the trees once more. For quite some time, life carried on as usual, though Echo missed expressing herself and singing. She tried to find peace and comfort in her life in the mountains. She still collected flowers and danced with her friends and slept by crackling bonfires under starry night skies. This went on for months and months, until memories of her life, while she still had a voice of her own, were faint. But life in the mountains changed eventually. There was a town miles and miles away, a simple town of stone streets, a craftsman town full of pottery and art and vibrant woven cloths, all knitted together to create the fabric of the community. And within this town was a man named Narcissus. From his birth, he was one of the most popular, beloved people in town. He had high cheekbones, flawless skin, and breathtaking blue eyes that others frequently got lost in. His hair was golden and shined in the sun, casting a golden glow on the world around him everywhere that he went. Because he was so beloved, Narcissus was not treated like those was around him. He was viewed as somewhat of a god, a beautiful man, too beautiful to belong to any of the women in town. He was so beautiful, in fact, that anyone who looked at his face would fall madly in love with him. It would start with a feeling of warmth that would rush over their bodies like a cerulean wave. The rest of the world would fade away as they gazed upon his face. There were no other people, no words, no music, no breeze whispering through the trees next to them. All that existed was him, the beautiful boy with the golden hair. Their hearts would begin to beat in pace with his, as if they were tied together now, meant to be with one another. But because every woman in the town was in love with him, Narcissus did not know true love. He felt too high and mighty, too narcissistic to love anyone but himself. And so, he lived a lonely life, surrounded by people who were infatuated with him, but would never truly know him. One day, the men in this town decided it was time to traverse to the mountain far, far in the distance. Narcissus accompanied them, and for the first time, he entered the woods. He was not a man who found any particular beauty in nature, nor was he a man who was fond of spending his time with other men. As they settled in to camp for the first night, Narcissus wandered off into the woods, thinking himself too important to have conversations with the other men. He walked along a simple, winding dirt path littered with leaves of amber, green, and fiery red. It was peaceful here. The birds chirped overhead, even louder as he passed, as though they, too, could see his beauty. It wasn't long before Narcissus realized that he was lost. The path had disappeared from beneath his feet long ago, and he was in the center of the lush forest with nowhere to go. Little did he know, he wasn't alone. In a grove of trees nearby, Echo caught sight of him. It was the first time the forest had ever had visitors aside from Zeus and Hera, and she found herself wondering what this could mean for her future and the future of the mountain. She brushed leaves aside as she made her way toward the man. She could only see him from behind, but what she saw made her heart stop. his strong back, casting patterns that moved as he did. Unable to speak to him, she followed behind him for quite some time, simply watching in peaceful silence. He seemed frustrated as he wandered through the woods, and as afternoon began to sweep its cold hand over the forest, a mist laced through the trees around him. He looked almost like a painting, a man alone in the woods, standing in a grove of trees and surrounded by a thick blanket of fog. For a moment, Echo sat next to a tree and simply breathed him in, observing him like the piece of art that he was. And it was then that he turned toward her. She was obscured by a lush juniper bush sprouting from the ground before her, but peering through the fragrant branches, she could see him. As his eyes swept in her direction, and as she took in his face for the very first time, life as she knew it changed. He was, without a doubt, the most beautiful thing she had ever seen in her entire life. At once, a warmth of affection and love washed over her. Her mind was enveloped with thoughts of what could be. In that single moment, she could see it all laid out before her. She could see her life with him, the two of them, waking up in a cabin in these beautiful mountains together, cooking breakfast over a crackling fire as the morning sun painted the mountaintops blue and pink and gold. She could see them eating their breakfast, wrapped in one another's arms as the birds began to rise from their nests, shaking off their slumber and singing their words to awaken the rest of the world. She could see them wandering through the woods together every day, stopping by gentle streams to bathe together in the cool mountain water, standing beneath waterfalls and laughing as they held one another under the slowly cascading water. She could see them lying in fields of wildflowers, his strong hands weaving a crown of flowers just for her head. She could see them curling up in bed at night, their fingers intertwined as they watched the stars sweep across the night sky. They would listen to the sounds of the forest falling asleep, the crickets chirping into the night air, the wind whistling through the leaves just a bit louder, the jackals and foxes howling in the far distance, singing a song of their own to the crystal clear night air. And as she saw all of these scenarios in her head, she fell more and more in love with each fantastical moment. She shook this dreamy facade from her head, returning to the reality at hand. Narcissus was walking away from her now, continuing his journey through the forest. She felt a tug at her heart, as though the universe was telling her she needed to be with him. Blindly, with only him in her view, she followed him deeper and deeper into the woods. With every quiet step she took over the beautiful forest floor, she fell more and more in love. She felt as though she knew him, as if she knew the story of the spring in his step, knew the reason why he always kept his right hand clasped at his waist, knew the reason he paused to brush his hair back and smiled ever so slightly every time he did so. This continued for several hours. Narcissus was lost, and yet he had utter confidence that this challenge was not too much for him. He felt that he could find his way back home with ease. After all, he was Narcissus. And as those hours dragged on, Echo followed. But the more time passed, the more careless she became of concealing herself in the trees. The love she had for this man was so overwhelming that it seemed her body had no room for anything else. Finally, Narcissus stopped for the night. He had an inkling that there was someone in the woods with him, but he did not fear. He settled down at the base of a beautiful willow tree, making his home for the night under its flowing tendrils. Echo settled nearby, nesting in the branches of a gnarled lilac bush with heavy flowers that peppered the grass at her feet. She could see him from there in her fragrant hideaway. She watched as he lit a fire for the night. As the sparks emerged into the dark night air, she felt as though the breath had been sucked from her lungs. The warm glow of the fire illuminated his face, making him look even more beautiful. He was ethereal, like an angel the gods had placed upon the earth just for her. It was almost unbearable how perfect he was. Echo longed to kiss his plush lips, to hold him close, to run her hands through his golden mane and whisper poetry into his ear. Had she not been cursed, she would have have approached him hours ago, but the fear of her curse driving him off was sowed deep within her, just as Hera had hoped all those months ago. That night, as Narcissus slept, Echo crept a little closer to him, desperate to get more of a look at this angelic man. She watched in awe as his chest rose and fell, rose and fell, rose and fell, rose and fell, and with each breath he took, she felt more enamored with him. She desperately wanted to kiss him, but knew she could not. Instead, she placed some lilacs by his head and returned to the bush, hoping that the gift would be well received. That night, she hardly slept, and when she awakened to Narcissus tucking the flower she had laid by his head behind his ear. The purple petals popped against his golden hair, and Echo felt even more longing just being near him, wanting to find his way back to the village. Narcissus continued on his way. Echo thought it would be just like yesterday, a journey through the woods, trailing behind her beloved. But that day was different. The fog in the forest was thick, and though it brought beauty with it, it also brought a sense of mystery, a fear that anything could happen. Narcissus's confidence waned as he traversed the woods, and Echo's footsteps became crystal clear to him as they wandered into a stunning swath of forest, chock full of birch trees. Narcissus stopped. He turned on his heels, his eyes wide with worry. And then he spoke for the first time. "Who is here?" he asked, his voice wavering in the slightest. Echo clung to those 3 words in utter awe. Even his voice was beautiful, like melodic poetry. She hid behind a nearby tree, her heart thrumming against her ribcage as she took in the sight of her beloved. "Here," Echo replied. Her words were bright and airy, fueled by the overwhelming love and affection she had for Narcissus. Narcissus looked around in confusion, but there was a spark in his eyes. Echo's voice, even though controlled by the curse, was just as beautiful as it always had been. "Who is here?" he asked again. His words were stronger this time, tinged with more curiosity than fear or concern. "Here," Echo chimed again. She wrapped her hands around the bark of the birch tree before her, wishing that it was Narcissus she could hold instead. "Who are you?" Narcissus called out. "Come to me." He began to tiptoe around the woods, looking in bushes and behind trees in search of the mysterious source of the voice. Echo tiptoed around him, keeping herself hidden the way that only wood nymphs can. "Come to me," she sang. Narcissus grew frustrated with this game. He settled into the center of the forest, his arms crossed over his chest as he glanced around, eyes narrowed. He thought perhaps it was the forest playing a trick on him. He had read stories of creatures in the woods tricking people. So, eager to get to the bottom of it, he called out once more, "Who are you? Let us meet." The last three words set Echo's heart ablaze. Her love, the man she had been following for a day now, he wanted to meet her. He wanted that future with her. The cabin in the woods, breakfast over a fire, as they watched the sunrise paint the landscape around them. Lazy days beneath waterfalls, laughing and singing in one another's company, sleeping beside one another every night. Echo couldn't endure living in the fantasy on her own anymore. She burst out from her hiding place, her arms outstretched, ready to embrace the love of her life. "Let us meet," she cried, smiling from ear to ear. She was overjoyed that he finally wanted to meet her. She had never felt so happy in her life. But Narcissus was shocked to see the nymph. As her arms wrapped around him, he pushed her away in shock. At home, no one dared to touch him. Angered and horrified, he snapped at her. "Take off your hands. You shall not fold your arms around me. Better death than such a one should ever caress me." Echo stood in the forest before him, crestfallen. "Caress me," she replied against her will. Distraught at his rejection, Echo disappeared into the forest, leaving a trail of tears in her wake. She found her way to a cave high in the mountains, a lonely place where she could drown in her sorrows over her lost love and reflect on what her life had become. Had Narcissus not been a cruel man, he might have learned to love Echo. And had Echo not been cursed, she might have shown Narcissus how to love goddesses and nymphs that came before us. Narcissus wandered through the woods, distraught by his strange encounter. It was there that he discovered a pool of water that seemed to glow in the sunlight. It was undisturbed. Not a single animal drank from the cool water. Not a single leaf had fallen upon its glassy surface. Narcissus lowered himself down to take a sip of the water. And as he did, he saw the most beautiful sight before him. It was a man with high cheekbones and brilliant blue eyes. A man of beauty and grace. A man that looked as though he had been carved from marble for the gods themselves to enjoy. And it was at that moment that Narcissus fell deeply, madly in love. He was spellbound by this man in the water. This man he had never seen before. He leaned down, trying to kiss the man, only to realize that it was his own reflection. But love is strong, and love for oneself can be one of the strongest loves on earth. Narcissus lay by the water in a trance for days on end, enamored with his own reflection. As more and more time passed, he wasted away until one night he disappeared. In place of his body grew a breathtaking flower, a flower with a golden center and stark white petals that reminded the nymphs of the snow. Echo, too, disappeared, though part of her remained, her voice echoing people's words back to them in the beautiful mountains. I hope you have enjoyed this story, and it has brought you a night of peaceful, restful sleep. Please join me again tomorrow for another sleep story. Until then, sweet